Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the more astonishing and frankly embarrassing moments of the current conflict involving Vladimir Putin's forces. We'll examine how a frontline operation turned into a logistical nightmare when those troops found themselves mired in mud, unable to advance, retreat, or maneuver effectively. This isn't just a funny clip. There are deeper tactical, strategic, and symbolic implications that are worth unpacking. The story begins with the terrain. In warfare, terrain is often treated as a silent opponent, and in this case the terrain seems to have beaten the attackers. Reports show that Russian armored vehicles and support units got bogged down in swampy ground as they attempted to press forward. For example, in a February 2022 report, a column of Russian tanks near the Ukraine border stalled because of mud so severe that they required digging out efforts, the so-called Rasputitsa season, when thawing ground turns into a quagmire, has historically been a limiting factor for mechanized forces in Ukraine, Russia included. What makes this particular incident stand out is the combination of poor planning, over-reliance on mechanized assault without adapting to conditions, and the resulting public and morale damage. Videos circulating show Russian combat units unable to push ahead, their vehicles stuck, their movement slowed. One article noted that the UK Ministry of Defense assessed that soft ground conditions across most of Ukraine were slowing operations for both sides, but Russian media appeared to exaggerate the impact of mud on Ukrainian forces, while at the same time Russian vehicles were indeed getting stuck. Let's break down exactly how this played out, step by step. First, the decision to advance in unfavorable terrain. The forces attempting this push likely counted on speed, armor, and firepower, but what they underestimated was mobility degradation. As the tanks and associated vehicles moved into muddy ground, their traction dropped, wheels and tracks dug in, and dead ground loomed. A tank isn't just a big gun, it's a machine that needs to move. The moment its movement is compromised, its effectiveness plunges. Second, the consequence of immobilization. Once vehicles become immobile, they are vulnerable to artillery, anti-armor fire, and infantry attack. They become logistic burdens. They need recovery assets, fuel, repair parts. The operation begins to stall. For the attacking force, it's disciplining. Units fall behind, timing is lost, the momentum evaporates. Third, the symbolism and morale effect. For troops, seeing your own previews fail, seeing your vehicles stuck in mud, conveys a message of unpreparedness. On the home front and global stage, seeing images of one of the world's major military powers' forces unable to overcome mud damages credibility. It gives fodder to opponents and detractors alike. Fourth, the broader strategic implications. If you can't move, you can't exploit, you can't reinforce. Offensive operations hinge on mobility. In the current war theater, where zooming in on rapid advances, surprise shifts and flexible tactics matter, being stuck means you lose initiative. The adversary can adjust, strike where you're vulnerable, or simply wait you out. Putting troops into terrain you can't effectively fight in is a strategic misstep. Consider that this isn't the first time the Russian forces have found mud a problem. The earlier report from Task and Purpose noted how tanks near the border were stuck in mud during what seemed like training or pre-invasion staging. But the current event underscores how, in combat conditions, the risks are real and immediate. Now, let's talk about what lead-in mistakes appear to have been made. One is underestimating the timing of the ground's condition. Thawed ground is treacherous, and if the window for dry ground shrinks, mechanized forces are at risk. Another is perhaps the mismatch between the forces used and the environment they were assigned to. Heavy armor needs good roads or firm ground. Lighter forces may have more flexibility in soft terrain. Third, the logistics and recovery planning may have been insufficient. When vehicles get stuck, you need rapid extraction, support, and backup. Another point, the decision-making chain. If command pushes forward despite warning signs about terrain, or overlooks the need to reconnoiter more deeply, then the burden falls on the troops on the ground. It becomes a reflection on training, equipment suitability, scouting, and intelligence. If subordinate units warn of bad ground and are ignored, that's a breakdown in command trust. In terms of what went wrong for the attackers, loss of tempo, inability to exploit breakthroughs, increased exposure to counter fire, growing vulnerability of supply lines and reinforcement paths. All of these degrade the offensive. In contrast, the defenders benefit. They can watch the attackers bogged down, allocate assets to strike where stuck, and maintain interior lines while the attacker fights the ground. For the defender side, this is a gift. You don't need to attack, you just need to hold and wait. From a morale and propaganda viewpoint, images of stuck tanks do wonders for the defender's narrative and the attacker's embarrassment. Even if one side exaggerates for its own internal propaganda, the underlying fact remains that mobility was compromised. The intelligence summary noted that Russian outlets were overemphasizing Ukrainian mud-related problems while downplaying their own. So there is a dissonance between narrative and reality. Let's also look at lessons learned and what this event suggests moving forward. For one thing, in this conflict, terrain and weather remain major factors. This is not a conflict of purely high-tech maneuvers in perfect weather. It reminds us of past wars, from Napoleon's Russia campaign to Operation Barbarossa. Ground that turns to mud kills armies, or at least breaks them. For modern militaries, mechanized columns must consider seasonal conditions, route selection, environmental recon, and reconfirmation and contingency plans for mobility loss. Secondly, adaptability matters. If you face conditions that impede heavy armor, you shift your tactics. Maybe more infantry, more air assault, lighter vehicles, more modular logistics. Perhaps you reduce reliance on a single thrust and instead favor infiltration, flanking, bypassing thick terrain. Third, recovery and extraction capability become essential. If you know there is risk of immobilization, you must be prepared with heavy recovery vehicles, engineering units, bridging or ground stabilizing assets, and alternate routes. Without that, you become fixed. Fourth, command and intelligence must coordinate. Reconnaissance must include geotechnical, weather, terrain analysis, not just enemy positions. The human dimension matters too. Troops must be warned about what they face, trained for extraction, prepared for the worst. Fifth, the political, strategic costs. A failed offensive due to terrain alone may seem like bad luck, but it reflects on leadership. For Putin's forces, being stuck in mud isn't only a logistical mishap. It becomes a national and international embarrassment. It fuels narratives of mismanagement, ill-preparedness, and can undermine the broader strategic aims. Let's consider counter-arguments or caveats. Yes, terrain hampers both sides. The Ukrainians also face muddy conditions, trenches that fill with water, ground too soft to move swiftly, so the issue isn't unique. But the key difference is perhaps preparation and adaptation. If one side is better at adjusting to conditions, then terrain stops being a neutral player and becomes an advantage. Also, some might argue that even getting stuck doesn't always mean defeat. It can be recovered, vehicles freed, operations rerouted. But the cost in time, momentum, and resources matters. In an offensive war, you're playing for tempo. Every hour you're stuck is an hour the enemy uses to regroup or strike back. Another caveat: the reports we have may emphasize the stuck vehicles because they're visually striking. The full picture may include many other moving elements, but still, the fact that this happened is telling. Let's look at what this means going forward in the conflict. If Putin's forces continue to attempt heavy armored, thrusts across terrain that's soft, muddy, or otherwise unfavorable, they risk repeating similar failures. That means slower advances, higher attrition, greater exposure, and more lost resources. For Ukraine, though, it means there is an opportunity. The defenders can exploit the attackers' delays, strike when mobility is low, anticipate stuck vehicles, or force the enemy into terrain traps. From a strategic communication viewpoint, Ukraine and its allies will likely emphasize events like this, using them to bolster morale, show that the Russian advance can be blunted, that the invader isn't invincible. On the Russian side, there will be attempts to spin it, claim success elsewhere, blame terrain, deny losses, but the image of stuck tanks remains. One big takeaway: for mechanized forces in conflict zones, mobility is essential, and it's often the first casualty of sloppiness in planning. The best tank or IFV or armored column is useless if it can't advance, or if it becomes a static target. This incident serves as a vivid demonstration of how even powerful armies can be humbled by simple things: mud, softness of ground, lack of preparation. We should also reflect on broader implications for military doctrine. War in modern Europe is not just about heavy armor and air power, it's about combined arms, logistics, terrain, weather, engineering, engineers, reconnaissance, mobility, and flexibility. If a force pushes into an environment without factoring in these, the high-end assets may become liabilities. In closing, the scene of Putin's forces getting stuck in mud is embarrassing, yes, but more importantly, it's instructive. It shows the importance of not underestimating the ground beneath your tracks, of aligning tactics with terrain, of being ready for mobility loss, and of respecting the adversary who can make you waste your time and resources simply by letting you flounder. It's not just about being stuck in mud, it's about being stuck in a plan that didn't account for the basics. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis helpful, please hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think this means for the broader war effort, or how the Russian military might adjust? Until next time, thanks for tuning in and stay curious.